Okay, so welcome back. This is News Gang. So we have a message here saying a small correction. On the bench, the one who ascended last is considered the baby judge. I like that, baby. Justice Koome was last, followed by Oko. She followed the order of seniority on the Supreme Court bench, not seniority as to when one signed the role of advocates. What is notable is that she is president and could have read last, but she went first. That was a little shocker, but once she started inviting the judges, it became apparent what system she was using. So the Chief Justice, who's the president, is the baby judge.
And to that, Yvonne, I say much obliged.
Great. That's what the show is about. So, listen, we were talking about the basic structure doctrine, not document. Yeah. Justice Isaac Lenaola had this to say.
Finding that the basic structure doctrine does not apply in Kenya in the manner suggested by the first, the fifth respondents, and that the four sequential steps set out by the High Court and the majority of the Court of Appeal only apply when a new constitution is being made and not in any amendment process under Article 257. In addition, based on our history, the text of our Constitution, and the context as outlined in my judgment, it is legislation such as the CKRC Act 2008 and 1997 that the four sequential steps should be anchored when and if the people ever want to change the present constitutional order.
So we've outlined those four sequential steps. Linus went into that, but they kept referring to this case from India.
Yes.
Jamila, what is this case about?
Remember when the judges were talking, they declared that our constitution had enough safeguards.
Yep.
Okay. So in 1973, there was a case called the Keshav Nanda Bharti versus State of Kerala, and it's actually considered a landmark in Indian constitutional independent history because it challenged the amendment, the 29th Amendment of the Indian Constitution in 1972. And this person, Keshav Nanda Bharti, a resident of Kerala, went to court because, in fact, she died in 2020 at the age of 79. She went to court to protect the property rights because they felt that they were being infringed upon by the law at the time. So that case was listened to by 11 judges, 13 judges, and it was a 7-6 judgment. It ruled that the parliament had no powers to alter the basic structure of the constitution, and this case went on for 68 days. Why is this case important? Why do they keep referring to it? Because it challenged 3 constitutional amendments, the 24th, 25th, and 26th amendments, which were introduced by the government at the time, which was headed by Indira Gandhi, if you all remember. She was the Prime Minister of India. And the principal question that was raised was that, can the parliament, can it amend the constitution in totality, especially with respect to fundamental rights? Remember, this was rights to own property.
Right.
Yes. So the court had to decide whether parliament could alter, amend, change any part of the constitution without now taking away the fundamental rights. But now with that 7-6 ruling, the Supreme Court ruled that the basic structure of the constitution was inviolable and could not be amended by parliament. That since that ruling of 1973 by the 13 judges of the Supreme Court, after deliberations, after 68 days of sitting to listen to that case, now has been regarded as one of the tenets of Indian constitutional law and what is being referred to in Kenya when we're listening to these cases. Because remember, the 2 lower courts had actually had upheld the basic structure doctrine in their ruling. And then, of course, now today the Supreme Court judges had a different opinion.
Right, yeah. Wakili?
It was actually the strongest argument of the petitioners when they went to the High Court. Remember, the duty of the High Court is to protect the Constitution. The constitutional wellness rests with the High Court. If you have an issue, you think somebody's violating the Constitution, you go to the High Court, and that is it's the primary court in such a matter. And the petitioners made a very successful application by saying the Constitution of Kenya 2010 is being amended in an abusive way, in a way that doesn't respect the principle or the doctrine, the basic structure doctrine. Remember, the basic structure doctrine refers the power of amending the Constitution to the common man. And that is why the argument was very successful in the High Court and in the Court of Appeal. Now, but we have to look at this case and the doctrine in terms of the principle. The principle is just to protect the Constitution from amendments and hyper amendments. Even the court itself called it hyper amendments. And why this principle very easily impressed the superior courts was because we know where the country is coming from. And you would remember how Justice Kiage, I think, went deep into the history of this country, way back to the 60s, and walking us up the constitutional journey. And remember, Justice Odunga did exactly the same thing. Now, today, the Supreme Court was very careful not to walk past the Court of Appeal where they sit. Don't go beyond that, because you will start stepping on some of these things. When you look at the Constitution of Kenya that preceded 2010, it was amended so many times that it lacked an identity. It was amended so many times, and that's what Justice Martha Koome was calling hyper amendments. But here is the balance that they explained that they have to really strike, which is a balance between amendments and rigidity. Yeah, because they were saying, okay, if you follow these things so strictly, you will not change anything in this.
Even when there is need to.
Yes, even when there is need to. And they argued in a very smart way, because they brought it up as you are not giving the sovereign the power to do what they need to do. You are basically being too rigid.
Yeah, and I think Chief Justice Martha Koome also talked about, there's been a good balance between the flexibility and the rigidity. But even on the issue of basic structure, she said that the two lower courts had failed to address the issue of balance and how that is achieved. So listen, guys, we've talked about, the big issues, the pertinent ones, the president, the basic structure doctrine, explained the history of that. But ultimately, constitutional making process, a referendum process, is also a political one. And there have been some political reactions to this. There was people on either side, that, I mean, like I was asking here with the panel I'd had earlier, people have invested time, emotions, money, in this process. So what happens now? What's the political consequence, Gashuri, of what happens next? Because you've got on one hand today we're hearing the Deputy President saying these two individuals should apologize to the country for wasting our time for 4 years. And in fact, I remember him earlier this week saying that this country, we're not in a constitutional moment, that we're in an economic moment. But what does this mean for either side?
Well, it has political repercussions, and those repercussions were evident as early as today. Even at the court, you could see the politics of it. Away from the legal issues, there was also the politics, because some of the lawyers who are representing various parties, they also work with these political players, so they understand their political needs. Some
of them are actually in the political fray, right?
They understand their political needs and their political interests. And this process also had a political interest, because in that very document, there was a proposal to expand the executive, create the position of a prime minister and 2 deputies. Look at what is happening in the political scene currently. There is coalition making, alliance building, alignments and realignments. And some of the positions that are being spoken about in hush-hush tones, of course, at the end of it all, when various political players coalesce and form a coalition or form an alliance, at the heart of it is the search for power. And this power is in positions. Yeah? And currently, if you were to use the 2010 Constitution in its strict sense, you're talking about 2 positions: the president and the deputy president. Some have said it's those vehicles that have only 2 seats, the president and the deputy.
Sports cars.
The sports cars particularly, only 2 seats. Others were talking about expanding it to make it a matatu kind of an executive.
Have everyone in.
Have everyone in, ostensibly to deal with the question of inclusivity. So even now, even as we speak, while there may be only 2 positions that will be, the main 2 positions for this election, you'll hear talk of the possibility of an executive order when the next government is formed. either way, to create a position of a chief minister and so on and so forth. So at the heart of it is also the question of positions, especially at the executive level. Even positions like that of the Speaker of the National Assembly, the Speaker of the Senate, are also part of the matrix in the political scene insofar as the question of coalition building and deal making is concerned. So yes, this BBI process has political consequences. But over and above the sharing of positions, it will also become a campaign issue. How? Because on one hand, the Kenya Kwanza team will be telling the country in the political arena that for 4 years, the president and the ODM leader concentrated on amending the constitution. But on the other hand, the Azimio la Umoja team will say it is the deputy president and his allies who opposed the attempt to reform the constitution. 1, increase representation. 2, deal with the question of revenue sharing. 3, increase the allocation to counties. So it will be a political discussion. And actually, as early as today, you heard what the deputy president was saying. I think it would be important to listen to what he was saying in Lamu today.
Walikuwa wanaturingia ati nobody can stop reggae. Reggae imekwama haijakwama. Reggae imefika tamati haijafika. Imefika mwisho haijafika. And we want to tell our friends, the handshake brothers and the BBI fraud they visited on the people of Kenya. Now that it is confirmed by the Supreme Court that the BBI and all the shenanigans around it were matters that were unconstitutional, illegal, null and void. The handshake brothers need to make an apology to the people of Kenya. They have wasted 4 years of our time. They sabotaged the Big Four plan.
Yvonne and the team, look, initially, the deputy president was very careful on how he was addressing the president insofar as the question of the handshake is concerned. Actually, the blame was always on Raila Odinga since he came into the handshake. But I've always argued that this handshake has 2 hands, the president's and the ODM leaders. So if the handshake is bad, then it means both the president and the ODM leader share equal blame, isn't it? But today, it's a more bold kind of a response, the handshake brothers.
Yes.
So in reference to the president and to the ODM leader, asking them to apologize to the country. Are they likely to do that? Of course they will not. They wouldn't apologize to the country. But now what I found more interesting were the statements by Musalia Mudavadi and Moses Wetangula. Take a listen.
Sema kwamba hawa jamaa kwa muda wa miaka 4 wametumia karibu bilioni 20 na hata zaidi kutuzungusha, lakini sasa Supreme Court imesema Kenyans cannot continue to suffer the way they have been suffering. Kwa hivyo tunasema asante sana kwa Supreme Court.
Na Rais Uhuru, you must now know that every misadventure has consequences. And today you have seen the consequences of your misadventure. You are misadvised. You now have a rotten egg on your face. Mambo ya BBI.
Guys, do you remember Musalia Mudavadi signing the BBI document at KICC? And it was not so long ago. Actually, the BBI process had gone quite far, quite far. I mean, signatures. I mean, the document had already been taken to the county assemblies.
That's right.
It had gone to parliament. It was now signature collection. That day when the president was signing that document at KICC, when Raila Odinga was signing that document at KICC, Musalia Mudavadi was also there. So he's saying, in 4 years, wametuzungusha and spent 20 billion shillings. That 4 years include that day when the signing was happening at KICC.
Yvonne,
and that's the nature of our politics,
that's the nature
isn't
it?
Yeah,
you know, we feature them on SEMA every day, Juzi Jana.
Juzi Jana.
Yeah, what someone said 2 years ago and what they're saying now, totally different. But I think, Yvonne, what Gashuri talks about actually made me think of maybe this ruling has sort of like taken the what out of the sails? What was
the wind
out of the sails, kidogo, because they may have wanted it to pass so that they could use it as a campaign messaging saying hawajali, like what you said, hawajali, wanajifikiria tu wao wenyewe, nyinyi mnateseka na mambo ya gharama ya juu ya maisha, because it's what people are facing every day. When we're listening to the soundbites from people across the country, those who are against the BBI process are saying it's good because they need to be concentrating on wananchi wa kawaida, the cost of living is going up, petrol imepotea, and all those things that they're talking about. So maybe this is maybe a bit of a reprieve for the Azimio side, because this would have been a big campaign issue, and people do care about things like pesa hizi ambazo zinatumika zingetumika kunisaidia mimi. Yvonne, that's one. And two, before Linus comes in, we've talked about how where is the Attorney General in all this? As we look forward to the future, what next? Because remember, this process has taken, 48 months? It's been concluded 4 months to elections. Gashuri, there were 19 judges involved. If we start from the High Court.
No, 5 plus 7 plus 7, 19. 7.
From the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court. And you've lost all through from the beginning. And the Attorney General is supposed to be wakili mkuu wa serikali, supposed to advise the serikali. So what does this mean exactly to the AG in terms of his advice to the executive? Was he advising them wrongly? Didn't he read the scene? Because those are the things he's supposed to do. You've lost, not once, not twice, 3 times. BBI has been thrown out. But in part, I think we need to look at what the role of the AG has been in this whole thing.
Or whether he's been heard. Linus?
I think one of the things that really need to be done is to protect the true record of this matter. Because suddenly, and not suddenly, but actually for long now, it has become an issue of political contention and contest, where politicians, in their very usual way, would come and try and claim credit. It is, for example, forgotten tonight, as you see all those back and forth arguments, including what we've just seen there, that the petitioners was actually David Ndii and 79 others, and a civic-minded group calling itself Linda Katiba. This is their big moment, and I think credit needs to go where it's due. They are the persons that should claim credit for what is happening today and for stopping reggae. And there's something admirable about the initiative by Linda Katiba. They have done it without politics in mind. They were not doing it for political reasons. They were doing it to protect the Constitution, genuinely. And one of the things that came through, right through their arguments, was the history of mutilation of the Constitution. And this was the greatest fear of David Ndii, Linda Katiba team, that they are starting again. The executive is doing what it has done in the past. They want to subject the Constitution of Kenya 2010 to the same cannibalistic amendments that we've seen before. So this is a big moment, not for any politician, but for Linda Katiba. But you know, politicians would take credit even for rainfall.
And you know, it's interesting to note that, you know, like what you say, when they started out with this petition at the High Court, they were on their own, and there was, you know, quite a few of the political class who, like we've said, were either supporting BBI or perhaps were sort of standing on the sidelines and approaching a sort of, let's wait and see how this process goes. And like Chief Justice Martha Koome said, for a constitution from that we promulgated in 2010. In fact, I think one of the judges said at 10:26, you know, on that day when, you know, the president... At Uhuru Park, when the president signed it. There have been 21 attempts. In 10 years. Yeah. To, you know, amend the Constitution. 9 have been parliamentary, 2, you know, have been popular initiative. And so you can tell, you know, the moment at which, or the attempts by which, you know, we have had to try and change this Constitution. And it also brings me to another big, you know, thing that was said by the proponents of this. We remember President Uhuru Kenyatta talking about a constitutional moment, and we here around this table...
The First Amendment, he called it.
Yes, questioned whether this was a constitutional moment, because without a doubt, usually that is something that is driven by the people from the bottom.
And it is self-evident.
It's very self-evident, you're right. There's a mood in the air. You know, there's a wind of change. There's a desire to change. You'll find lots of people coming up, even in barazas at Bunge la Mwananchi, who are saying, we're unhappy with this, we're unhappy with that. But this all originated from, you know, a very different part of this country. And we constantly question that. And I think the High Court, you know, talked about it. The Court of Appeal pronounced itself. And finally now the Supreme Court saying, you know, not so fast. For anything that was a constitutional moment, it would never have gotten this far. Not at the High Court, not at the Court of Appeal, and certainly not here. And the other thing I think for me that stood out was the fact that, I mean, out of this process, not just Linda Katiba, but take a look at some of the young legal minds that, you know, shone through. People, you know, we perhaps hadn't seen and who stood their ground and, you know, made arguments, especially in a case that is so big and so far-reaching, you know, when you're talking about the Constitution and at the various levels, at the High Court, Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court.
And even there were several SCs there, senior counsels, and these guys actually came out.
Right, and you know, they were either side by side or really on their own, but they really stood out. Elias Mutuma, Dudley Ochieng, Christian Andole, even Esther Angawa, you know, these were people that you saw coming to the forefront, and you're starting to see, okay, this could be the next crop of senior counsel, you know, that will perhaps we will hear a lot more from, you know, in the years to come. So I think those for me were the major issues. Constitutional moment, we said it wasn't, and now, you know, pronounced.
Where I come from, Yvonne, in Banana, they say, and Linus would relate with this because I'm going to mention cows. They say,
I relate to cows.
If you have a herd and that herd does not have calves, then that is a dead herd.
True.
So when you have young lawyers making great presentations, you know, very good, in the presence of really senior counsel, and even you'd say, quote unquote, defeat the senior counsels, then it tells you that the future is bright, that in the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you will have guys who are very well grounded, using the experience of this BBI matter. And I would think quite a number of lawyers were involved right from the High Court to the Supreme Court. And I think it is also a good thing for our country that even as our judiciary grows, so does our legal fraternity. And that is a good thing for our country.
Right, yeah.
There should be a rider right there, and that is what Chief Justice Martha Koome had to do today, which is mention some of the senior lawyers who should be good role models. I know there is an argument these days that nobody wants to be anyone's role model, but the Twitter, the social media behavior of some of them has actually now ended up as an issue in the Supreme Court.
True. It
has caught their attention. Remember what the Chief Justice was saying is going to be on record. It is in record today in the same weight as the rest of the decisions that the court had to make today, and that is shameful. Nelson Harvey has presided over an LSK that has witnessed chaos in the offices. You know, I think there was tear gas even at some point. Tear gas at the LSK offices and chaos and disputes in the office and all that. This is a space of civility. And it comes through, look at how the whole process, which is very acrimonious. I mean, if we were to leave BBI to be sorted out the traditional way, we wouldn't have a country. We wouldn't have a country. Yeah. But look at how the legal fraternity just navigated all this. There's also a need for restraint and to hold back. Respect those institutions, respect the magistrates. I mean, a member of the legal fraternity was, you watched the video in Milimani Court the other day. If a lawyer can behave that way, what can an ordinary person do? If they can tweet the same way Ahmed Nasser is tweeting inaccuracies, casting aspersions on senior judges. But to the point that you had made earlier, just before I forget, you had actually spoken about the constitutional moment and also the implication to President Uhuru Kenyatta. 3-0 for a head of state is very bad.
Yeah.
It works well with Arsenal, but not... sorry, Jamila, but not a head of state.
I felt that for you, Jamila.
It's a fact.
That cut deep.
Expect it.
That cut deep.
Can I carry on? Yeah. And sorry, Jamila. There's something it also says that what are the conversations in the circles that handle the legal issues for the most powerful office in this country? Do you just walk into some of these things blindly? Is it very difficult to, for example, project whether a president actually can initiate the constitutional amendment through the popular initiative? Is it very difficult to actually project that? Yeah. Is it very difficult to project or even weigh the option of going to appeal? Did BBI need to go to the Supreme Court really after the two stages? Because what has happened, and as much as you try and cushion this and make the landing soft, it's still the same. What happened in the court of Supreme Court today is exactly what happened in the preceding courts, because they were told, no, that process is unconstitutional. Now, this raises the question about the quality of advice around President Uhuru Kenyatta. Some of these things should not really happen. It is humiliating. He has lost too many cases. I mean, today, and for the third time, right through all the three stages of court, his immunity was in question. Yeah. He was just one step away from a very ordinary space, which I think is the mishandling of that office. There have been only 4 presidents in this country, and if you look back, there was a lot of quality when it comes to those who surround the president. You must protect that office and the dignity of that office. You know, it's actually humiliating when, magistrates, judges are ruling.
And just to add, it's not just with the BBI. No. I mean, they have... This government, this executive has been cited by magistrates' courts, high courts, sanctioned, injunctions. Lots of things that they have passed have been declared unconstitutional. So that speaks to something about this administration. Even and the manner in which even appointments have been, challenged in court, and, and their appointment won. CAS's,
It is a good picture for the judiciary, showing that, it is a decisive. It is got institutional independence and the power to act and intervene in some of these issues. But it's also a bad picture on the front of due diligence for the government. Because you don't, everything, I mean, even rulings, they have these conferences. Judges actually sit down to discuss how they're going to proceed. Even in court, the process is preceded by a conference. Do these teams up the houses of power do those reflections? Can we think about, don't just walk into the court with what really looks like a very, very weak argument and expect some miracles? I mean, there are no miracles now. Because again, what we've seen, and this is my last point, what we've seen the Supreme Court do so well today, which was one of the greatest fear for anybody who has been observing the judiciary. One of the things that the judiciary, the Supreme Court was having to do today was to preserve the institution. Don't humiliate yourself. Don't suicide bomb the judiciary, which is what would have actually happened had this court made some of the most difficult. Looking at Njokindungu's argument, for example, it's very hard to sell out here. If the whole court, for example, had gone that way, that would have been suicide. There would have been something you'll be saying about the 2 superior courts that so diligently handled the same matter for you and went through very hectic hearing and all that to come up to the decisions that they did. So the Supreme Court today had the responsibility to preserve the institution. And I think it came out well, because everybody, including Ahmed Nasir, who was tweeting, was saying, no, they have been instructed to act a certain way. And it comes out, and the judges have actually come up with what I think was a weighty and well-weighted judgment.
Yvonne, as we finish, 20 seconds, Gashuri, if I may, and just as a reminder, Linus, that Arsenal is number 4 and a game in hand. An issue that came up today, and when the judges were speaking, remember this judgment is supposed to be 1,500 pages, but they summarized it in large part. 2 judges said something, Yvonne, that I think comes to mind as Gashuri comes in. You mentioned about this new crop of lawyers who have been doing a good job, but Justice Smokin Wanjala and I think Justice Lenaola said that lawyers these days don't read rulings. Yes. Exactly. So they said they need to read the rulings, all of it, even though they're giving a summary.
Maybe they should be posted on Twitter.
Maybe they'll see it better then.
Wow.
But something else, Chief Justice Martha Gomez said that, of course, the full judgment will be available on Tuesday, because she said they have to be careful about matters of confidentiality in terms of now the ruling not leaking. And with this age of social media, can you imagine if that ruling had leaked before? So I thought I should mention.
I was looking at the statement by the Right Honourable Raila Odinga, the ODM leader. I will focus on the last paragraph of it. We shall deliberate on the way forward and decide on a future course of action that protects the interest of all those who voted to see the amendments come to light. Something also came to my mind, the parting shot of Paul Mwangi when he seated here, that President Uhuru Kenyatta will be a private citizen
very soon. In 4 months.
In 4 months. So what does that mean? Maybe there would be an attempt to bring back the amendments, probably. But I also think the discussion at the Supreme Court was not so much that the BBI process, if it was to be allowed, those proposals be implemented in the 2022 August 9th general election, but maybe futuristic, because of course 130 days, there's very little that you can do about it. But shows probably that dream deferred that the president was talking about. Reminds me of that poem called Harlem by Langston Hughes. What happens, what becomes of a dream deferred? Maybe that's what Paul was alluding to, but be it as it may, I think the matter is now settled. Anybody who wants to amend the constitution in future, do you know what to do? The mechanism is clear now. And I would think that was the fundamental thing for me, that finally the Supreme Court has given the proper roadmap. If you want to amend the constitution, follow this way. And one particular issue, the president is not an ordinary citizen, and therefore cannot initiate cannot be the initiator of a popular initiative. Quite fundamental.
And it's now time for us to take a break, because we're coming in with our final words. But could we see President Uhuru Kenyatta, or rather when he's now just Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, 4 months from now, actually being a promoter of a bill and, you know, going around seeking signatures? Paul Mwangi seemed to say it. Well, as they say in the media, time will tell. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, our final word tonight.